They called me selfish. That's the word my mother used as she sat across from me in the same living room where I'd once opened Christmas presents and done my high school homework. She said it like it was an undeniable fact, as if I'd finally revealed my true colors by saying no. No, I wouldn't pay the mortgage on the house they had given to my brother. My name is Emily Parker, and this is what happened. The moment felt unreal, like I was watching it from somewhere outside myself. My parents sat on the floral couch that hadn't moved in decades, the air still carrying the faint scent of old lavender and furniture polish. My mother held her teacup with both hands, not looking at me directly. My father leaned back, legs crossed with the same quiet authority he used when he wanted to look reasonable while asking for something unreasonable. Jason wasn't even in the room. That was the part that hit me first. It wasn't him asking, it was them. They were the ones. Telling me he couldn't afford the payments right now, that it was a temporary situation, that I was doing better anyway. That family meant helping, and when I hesitated, just a pause, nothing more, my mother sighed and said it. Don't be selfish, Emily. The word sliced through me with such precision it took my breath away. Selfish. I sat there blinking, while the tea I hadn't touched grew cold in front of me. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something slower, older. A quiet wave of understanding washing over me, of finally seeing what I hadn't wanted to admit for years. They didn't see me as someone to protect. I was a resource, a solution. I stared at the photos on the mantle. There was Jason at his wedding, beaming beside his new wife, framed in gold. Next to it, a shot of the house, this house, decorated with white streamers. My mother had once said, "We wanted to do something special for him. It's his fresh start." She hadn't looked at me when she said it. I remembered the moment they told me the house was his. No discussion, just a smiling announcement, like it was a gift we were all supposed to celebrate. I hadn't argued then. I'd swallowed it, the way I always did. Told myself it didn't matter, that I had my own life, my own place, my own success. But now they were here, asking me to fund the very thing they had taken from me, to rescue the son who was always rescued, to keep the image of Jason's life afloat, on my back. And when I didn't instantly agree, I became the problem. I left that living room with a quiet goodbye and no promises. As I stepped out into the dusk, the air felt different, thicker, like it was holding something back. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head. Selfish. But the word didn't sting anymore. It settled like a seed in soil, waiting. There's a kind of silence that settles in a house when love is uneven. You don't hear it at first. It's not in the raised voices or even in the absence of them. It's in the little things. Who gets the bigger slice of cake? Who's allowed to make a mess and still be called creative? Who gets excused and who gets expected? In our house, Jason's laughter filled the space like sunlight. My presence was more like the wallpaper, necessary, consistent, but rarely noticed unless something was out of place. He was the golden child. Everyone knew it. My parents never said it out loud, but they didn't have to. Jason was the boy who made everyone laugh, the boy who had so much potential. He could break a vase and be called spirited. I could get a B+ and be met with silence. On his 8th birthday, my mother made him a chocolate layer cake so tall it nearly tipped when she set it down. There were sparkler candles and party hats and cousins filling the kitchen. 2 months later, on my birthday, we had vanilla cupcakes from a box and ate them in the living room while Jason played video games. I told myself it didn't matter, that birthdays weren't a competition, but when it happens year after year, the message gets through. I became the responsible one because someone had to be. I made my own lunch, folded my laundry, got myself to school. When Jason forgot his science project the morning it was due, my father drove it to the school and called him my little genius. When I won the school essay contest, my mother smiled distractedly and said, "That's nice, Emily," before turning back to stir the soup. It didn't make me bitter, not at first. I didn't need the attention. I needed the approval. I needed to believe that if I just kept trying, kept being good, kept being useful, one day I'd be seen. That love had to be earned, and I was willing to do the work. At 13, I started saving money from babysitting jobs. I kept my little stash in a blue tin under my bed labeled college. No one asked what it was for. At 16, when Jason crashed my dad's car after sneaking out to a party, the family's energy shifted to cover the damage. I cleaned the blood from the passenger seat before my mother got home so she wouldn't cry. She cried anyway, but not for me. Years later, I would come to understand that some families operate like scales. Where one child is lifted, the other must be weighed down to balance it out. But back then, I just thought I had to try harder. I thought if I could just keep being dependable, if I stayed quiet and helpful and invisible long enough, maybe one day someone would say, "Thank you, Emily." No one ever did. Jason had a gift for landing softly, no matter how hard he fell. When he dropped out of college halfway through his second semester, my parents didn't scold him. They called it a mental health break. When he crashed Dad's Camry into a lamppost at 2 a.m., they paid the insurance deductible and told the neighbors it was black ice. When he borrowed $3,000 from me, just until next payday, and never mentioned it again, my father laughed and said, "That's what siblings are for." It didn't seem to matter how many times he stumbled. He always had someone ready to smooth the road beneath him, to rewrite the story, before consequences could stick. They didn't treat him like a failure. They treated him like a fragile investment. A delicate genius, one step away from success. If only the world would give him one more chance. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs during college, waitressing on weekends, tutoring high schoolers on weeknights. My days were long and quiet, and no one ever called to ask how I was managing. The only thing my father said when I graduated early was, "Well, we always knew you'd be responsible." Responsible. That word again. It was the badge I wore while Jason collected trophies for simply trying. I still remember the day he bought a used sports car with money he couldn't afford. He showed up at our parents' house, revving the engine like a teenager, even though he was already 26. My mother clapped her hands and said, "Oh, it's so you, Jason!" The next month, he couldn't pay rent and moved back home. No one said a word about the car. I was working full-time by then, saving every extra cent to pay off my student loans. I remember sitting at my desk one night going through spreadsheets, while my phone buzzed with a photo, Jason holding a beer, grinning, arm around some girl I didn't know. The caption read, "He deserves this happiness." I looked at the photo for a long time. Deserve. That was the difference between us. He deserved happiness. I had to earn it. He was celebrated for surviving his mistakes. I was ignored for preventing mine. My mother once told me, Jason's just had a harder time finding his path. But it wasn't the path he couldn't find. It was the pressure. He had never needed to succeed because someone would always catch him. I had to make sure I never fell because no one was watching. Sometimes I think they didn't coddle him because they loved him more. They coddled him because they feared what he'd become if they didn't. But me? They trusted I'd survive, and that was the wound, being seen as strong only so they could leave me to carry everything alone. It was an offhand comment at a family dinner that revealed it. Jason's wife, newlywed and glowing, lifted her wine glass and giggled. It still feels unreal living in a house that's completely ours. I keep waiting for your mom to knock and remind us it's hers. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I turned to my father, fork paused midair. "Wait, the house?" He blinked at me like I'd asked something strange. "Oh, yes, we transferred the title to Jason as part of the wedding. It was simpler that way. You know how paperwork is." Simpler. That word did something sharp to my stomach. I felt my appetite dissolve, my hands growing cold around the silverware. No one had told me. No call. No conversation. No mention that the house I'd scrubbed baseboards in, shoveled snow from, and quietly paid to rewire after the electrical failed was now someone else's. Not just someone else's, Jason's. They called it a gift, a wedding gift. I smiled tightly and said nothing. I watched Jason rest his arm along the back of his chair like a king settling into his throne. Watched. My mother cut into the roast with contentment on her face. They had all decided this without me, like I was the third cousin twice removed. After dinner, I stood in the hallway and stared at a framed photo of us as kids. Jason in his superhero pajamas, me in a hand-me-down nightgown, smiling with one tooth missing. We were on the front porch of that house. My dad had taken the picture before school. Now the house belonged to him, completely. Legally. And me? I had my condo, my job, my life. I told myself that, over and over. But something in me twisted that night. Not out of greed, not out of envy, but out of recognition. They didn't forget to tell me. They didn't think they needed to. I was reliable, distant enough, already settled, already fine. The child who caused no trouble, the woman who asked for nothing. Maybe they assumed I would just understand, that I'd nod like I always had and say, "Of course, that makes sense." And I almost did. I almost swallowed it the way I'd swallowed every slight, every second place, every overshadowed moment. But walking to my car in the cold, I looked back at that house, the porch light glowing like an old memory, and I felt something break open in the quiet. Not a scream. Not even a crack. Just a shift. Something uncoiled in my chest, a stillness that didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like clarity. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where nothing's supposed to happen. I had just folded a blanket over the back of the couch and poured myself a cup of tea. The sky outside was overcast, pale gray filtering through the windows like a soft sigh. I was halfway through an article I wouldn't remember reading when my phone rang. I saw the name. Home. And for a second, I thought it might be about dinner plans or some passing family update. I answered with a familiar, gentle, "Hey, it was my mother. She didn't waste time." "Jason lost his job," she said. No preamble, no pause. I blinked. "What happened?" "They're cutting positions at his firm. Budget stuff. He's been so stressed. He didn't want to worry you." Worry me, the irony. There was a pause, long enough to feel like a decision was being weighed. "Well," she said, her voice lightening into something falsely casual, "they're a bit behind on the mortgage, just for now. He's trying, Em. But you know how it is. Starting over is hard, especially with a new baby on the way." I felt my spine stiffen. "Wait, how far behind?" 3 months, maybe 4. "But listen, we were thinking, since you're doing well and since the house is in Jason's name, it might be easier for you to just step in for a little while." She said it like it was logical, like it was kind. "Step in," I repeated. "Slowly, just until things stabilize. It's family, Emily. We support each other." The words stung, not because of what she said, but because of what she left unsaid. There was no offer of conversation, no talk of fairness, no mention of the fact that they had handed him the house without ever asking me if I wanted to be part of anything. They'd decided. Again. "Mom, I don't own that house," I said quietly. "You gave it to Jason. I wasn't even told." "There?" Was silence on the other end. Then her voice came back, sharper. "You're not technically responsible, no. But come on, Emily. Don't be selfish." That word. It stopped everything, froze the room, turned the air to glass. Selfish. It echoed in my ears like a scream underwater. She kept talking, something about how Jason was family, how this was temporary, how I was lucky not to have children yet. All things she thought would make this sound reasonable. But I barely heard her, because inside me, something began to close. Not out of rage, out of knowing that this wasn't the first time they'd expected me to carry what wasn't mine, to sacrifice without question, to pay for their choices quietly, completely, and to call it love. I ended the call with a hollow, "I'll think about it." And then I sat there, in that quiet room, holding my tea until it went cold, the word selfish ricocheting inside my chest like a stone in a glass jar, not breaking me, but warning me. I didn't cry after the call. I didn't scream. I didn't vent to a friend or pour a glass of wine or go on some long, cathartic walk. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up a blank spreadsheet. It started with numbers. 3 months of mortgage payments, based on the local tax records. The property taxes he hadn't paid. Utilities, maintenance. Then I started adding in everything else. The invisible things. The time I loaned Jason $10,000 when his business almost took off. The same loan my father had quietly suggested I let go of because he's family. I wrote it in bold, highlighted it in red. Then I kept going. The plane tickets I bought to fly home when Mom had surgery, because Jason had just started a new job and couldn't afford it. The graduation gift I gave his son when he forgot mine entirely. The time he crashed my car and my parents told me to claim it on my insurance, because we don't want him to lose his license. Every time I paid. Every time I swallowed it. Every time I told myself, it's fine. It wasn't fine. I had made peace with being the background, the support beam, the quiet fixer. But now that I was being asked to rescue a house I didn't own, again without question, without credit, something in me refused to disappear. I didn't plan revenge. I documented. Not for them, for me. Each line in that spreadsheet was like an exhale, a boundary I never knew I was allowed to draw, a ledger not just of money but of memory. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Love, when given unequally, creates debt. And for the first time, I wanted to know the full balance. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. There was no grand announcement, no confrontation. Just quiet. Evenings alone, combing through years of family emails, receipts, and vague conversations that suddenly took on new meaning when seen in a different light. It started with a forwarded message from my mother. Careless, routine. She had been reminding me to RSVP for Jason's baby shower and, without realizing it, included an old thread beneath her note. A thread that mentioned refinancing. The wording was strange. Final docs signed. Income line adjusted per dad's. Notes, Jason had written. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Adjusted income? That wasn't something you said unless something had been changed. Intentionally. It was enough to make me dig deeper. I searched through everything. Past, bank statements, group messages, old attachments that had once seemed irrelevant. There it was again, in a spreadsheet Jason had attached years ago for tax stuff. He'd inflated his earnings. And beneath that, an email from my father. Just tweak the freelance line. It's not like they'll check. I remembered the year they refinanced. The lowered interest rate. The celebration dinner. My mother had said they were finally in a better place financially. I had believed her, but it hadn't been better. It had just been forged. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. The house Jason owned, gifted, protected, was resting on paperwork that shouldn't have passed. And now, they wanted me to fund it, to prop up a structure built on deception while pretending it was family loyalty. I saved everything. Screenshots, PDFs, printed copies stored in a plain white folder I kept in the back of my closet, under a box of winter scarves. Not because I wanted to destroy them, but because I needed to understand what had really happened. It was never about just the house. It was about years of bending the truth to keep Jason floating, while I was expected to stay grounded, pay my way, and clap quietly from the sidelines. One afternoon, I made an appointment at a small law office on the edge of town. Not the kind with marble floors and sleek glass walls. Just a room with 2 chairs, a wooden desk, and a woman who listened closely as I laid out the evidence. I didn't cry. I didn't fumble. I just spoke. She nodded through most of it, then leaned back and said, "If what you're saying is accurate, this could constitute mortgage fraud." I didn't flinch. Not because I wanted to see them punished, but because for the first time, someone had said it out loud. It wasn't selfish to speak the truth. It was necessary. I didn't answer their calls, not the first one, not the 5th, not the 12th. When my mother left a voicemail so sugary it felt like syrup masking a blade. "Emily, honey, we just need to talk. It's not like we're asking for much. This is what families do for each other." They weren't calling for conversation. They were calling for compliance. I watched their messages pile up like unopened mail. My father's were brief. Jason's were angrier, accusatory, demanding. "So this is who you really are?" one said. Another just read, wow. Silence became my boundary, and the longer I held it, the more it rattled them. Then came the invitation, a baby shower for Jason's second child, hosted at the same house, the one now buried under a mountain of missed payments and falsified paperwork. The card was cream with gold lettering. My name misspelled. I RSVP'd without a word. When the day came, I arrived late. The party was in full swing. Balloons in pale blues floated from the porch railings. Laughter spilled from the living room. I stepped out of my car in a black dress and low heels, no makeup, no jewelry, like I was attending something solemn. Inside, my mother looked up, surprise flashing through her smile like a glitch in the code. Emily, oh, sweetheart, you made it. I nodded once. She stepped forward to hug me, arms open, but I didn't move. I walked past the streamers, past the folding tables piled with gifts, and approached the one covered in pastel-wrapped boxes. I set mine in the center, a plain white envelope. No ribbon, no note, just my handwriting, clear and small. My mother's eyes flickered to it. No gift? I met her gaze. That is the gift. And then I left. The envelope held a legal notice, a formal declaration of my refusal to assume any financial responsibility for the house. It included documentation of the fraudulent filings and a notice of inquiry from the lawyer I had retained. Didn't do it to make a scene. I did it so there would be no confusion. No more misunderstandings, no more erasures behind closed doors. In the past, silence had made me invisible. But now silence had become my weapon, and I'd never felt louder. The notice went through on a Thursday morning. It was clinical, almost quiet. Just an electronic confirmation from my lawyer. Motion filed to freeze title transfer pending investigation. We'll update upon court response. No drama, no fireworks. Just a silent lock on a house built on years of looking the other way. By Friday evening, the calls started again. First my mother, sounding shocked, confused, like she couldn't possibly imagine why such a thing would happen. We didn't do anything wrong, Emily. Why would you do this to your family? Then, my father, cool, clipped. This will make things complicated for everyone, especially Jason. Think about that. And then Jason himself. His voice on the voicemail was raw, angry, and frantic all at once. You froze the house? Are you insane? What gives you the right? You're doing this out of spite, Emily. You're punishing me because you're bitter. I listened to the message once, then again, just to let the weight of it sit, and then I didn't listen to any more. I didn't respond to the calls. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. Instead, I sent a single text to the family group. Chat. Given the financial misrepresentations involving the mortgage application, I've taken legal steps to protect myself from liability. I'm just protecting my financial exposure. It was almost word for word what my father had once told me when he declined to co-sign my student loans. It's not personal, Em. I just can't put myself at financial risk. So I used their language. Not because I needed to be cruel, but because I needed to be clear. The silence that followed was volcanic, heavy and wide. I imagined them sitting around the dining table, muttering to each other, trying to reframe the narrative into something that made me the villain. But the truth didn't need to shout. It only needed to stand. The house, Jason's prize, their legacy, was now legally untouchable until the court untangled the truth behind the papers they had so casually manipulated. No sales, no second mortgage, no quiet transfers to bury the debt. For the first time, they couldn't move without my shadow crossing the door, and I didn't do it out of vengeance. I did it because I was tired of being the afterthought, the helper, the background. This wasn't revenge. It was a boundary written in ink and silence. The conference room smelled faintly of laminate and recycled air, neutral walls, faux wood table, and a pitcher of water no one touched. I sat at one end, my lawyer beside me. Across from us, my parents. Jason didn't come. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with steady hands and a careful tone, greeted us all the same way, as if she were walking into a room with a fire already, smoldering under the floorboards. We got through the formalities quickly. Then she opened the folder. These documents reflect Ms. Parker's financial contributions and debts incurred by or on behalf of the property owner, Jason Parker, and in some cases with encouragement or participation by the defendants. All right, said it gently. But the words landed like weights on the table. She began to read aloud. The $10,000 loan with no repayment. The gifted appliances purchased on my credit card. The utilities paid. The contractor costs advanced when the plumbing. First, each item was tied to a date. Each date tied to an email, a receipt, a signature. I watched my father's face. Nothing flickered. He didn't interrupt, didn't scowl, didn't apologize. He just listened, blankly, as if this were a meeting about someone else's business. Deal that had gone sideways. And when it ended, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "You've always been vindictive, Emily." My lawyer opened her mouth, but I placed a hand on her arm. "I'm not," I said calmly, looking directly at him. "I just kept the receipts." My mother didn't speak. Her hands trembled as she reached for a tissue. Her eyes never met mine. Jason's chair stayed empty. There was no shouting, no apology, no emotional eruption. But in that silence, something cracked open inside me. Not because they finally saw me, because I no longer needed them to. There, in a beige room on a Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by paper and strangers, I let go of the hope that had bound me for so long, the hope that one day they'd say, "We were wrong. You mattered too." They didn't, and still I felt free. The house sold in late autumn, a quiet listing, no fanfare, priced just low enough to attract investors. The paperwork moved quickly once the freeze lifted. No one called to tell me it was the lawyer who forwarded the final notice of sale. It was done. The home I grew up in, the one filled with so many small betrayals disguised as tradition, was no longer ours. No longer Jason's. No longer anyone's, really. Just another property changing hands. Stripped of its meaning, its history packed away in boxes and resentment. My parents downsized to a condo on the edge of town. 2 bedrooms. No yard. My mother mentioned it in a clipped email. "We're settling in. Smaller than we're used. 2, but it will do." Jason didn't help them move. He didn't show up at Thanksgiving either. There was no fight, no dramatic fallout. Just an empty seat at the table and a silence everyone tried not to comment on. I spent the holidays at home, my home. I cleaned the windows, lit a candle that smelled faintly of cedarwood and cinnamon, and sat by myself in the calm. There was no need to perform, no weight of expectation, no quiet fear of being overlooked. In the corner of my apartment, above a narrow bookshelf, I hung a small frame. Inside it, in plain black lettering, was a quote I'd once written down during a long train ride home. "Silence is not weakness." I'd grown up believing the opposite, that staying quiet made you complicit, that if you didn't argue, you agreed, that if you didn't scream, you surrendered. But now I knew better. Silence can be strength, when it comes from clarity, when it draws a line no one else can cross, when it lets others crumble under the weight of their own choices instead of dragging you down with them. I didn't lose anything by walking away. I didn't pay their mortgage. I didn't fund their lies. I didn't erase myself to keep the peace. And for the first time, I wasn't buried beneath guilt for that. I paid nothing, and somehow that gave me back everything.